Shocking new details about the extent of the government's internet surveillance. Documents released by Edward Snowden to the Washington Post reportedly show that the NSA is collecting hundreds of millions of email address books and instant messaging contact lists from people around the world, and that includes Americans. And we're learning more now about how some of this NSA data is being used to locate drone targets. Joining me now is the Washington Post, Greg Miller. Greg has been covering all these stories, and Greg, we welcome you. Okay. How is it happening? How's the NSA using this address book information?
Well, you can see that the address book information, I think, helps us understand how they make use of these other databases that have been emerged as sources of controversy over the past 6 months with these Snowden leaks. So having someone's address book really enables you to map out details of that person's connections to others. So earlier we learned that the NSA collects, metadata, the records of calling information that people make in the United States and elsewhere. And if you marry that with the collection of email address books, you can start to draw connections just beyond those phone numbers that ping around, but also include email addresses, instant messaging addresses, essentially buddy lists, the people who are closest to you.
Okay, and we're talking about how many contact lists here?
Millions. I mean, some of these slides indicated that the NSA could collect as many as 500,000 in a single day, a couple 100,000 from Yahoo alone. So these are massive repositories.
Greg, Americans, do we have an idea what percentage is made up by American lists?
Well, I don't think we have a precise percentage on how many are Americans. We know that some are Americans, and the government, the NSA, emphasizes that this collection happens overseas. This isn't them collecting on Americans. But we know that Americans are nevertheless sort of mentioned or included in these databases because this data pings all around the world. Even companies like Google that are based in the United States rely on servers overseas for connections, and Americans obviously travel. So there is a fair number of Americans who are caught up in this data.
Okay, so for everyone who's in a panic right now going, what? Your paper quotes a spokesman for the Director of National Intelligence saying this in response. Here's the quote: "We're not interested in personal information about ordinary Americans." So have they offered changes since this report came out so fewer Americans get snared in the nets, so to speak? Well,
I don't think they have proposed any significant changes to this program. All of these programs are now just beginning to be kind of reviewed legislatively. There have been hearings in Congress in the last couple of weeks, new proposals each week on legislation to rein in some of these programs or modify the amount of transparency that surround them. So I think we'll see some changes, but it's likely to be minimal.
Okay. You also have a new article out, Greg, about how a secret NSA unit is using some of this data. And you've reported they've been able to use these email messages to really zero in on high-level targets, like bin Laden associate Hassan Gul. Can you explain that story?
Sure, yeah. No, this was another thing we learned from the Snowden documents. The drone program in Pakistan, we often associate that or describe it as kind of an exclusively a CIA program, but it doesn't work for the CIA without a lot of help from the NSA. And these documents showed how the NSA's ability to intercept emails and to secretly take control even of laptop computers and other devices enables them to get the coordinates and specific information on some of these people that the CIA is pursuing. And so our story this week talked about this one example, Hassan Gul, where the NSA intercepted an email from his wife. It had enough information about where he lived that they were able to get coordinates on that house. And days later, Hassan Gul was dead from a drone strike.
Is anybody opposing this? I mean, when you look at the effectiveness of getting a guy like Hassan Gul, are people really opposing what's happening with the NSA and gathering up this information?
Well, no, and that's a point we made in the story. There was some who read the story wondered, well, what is the scandal here? And we pointed out in the story, this is what the NSA says it does, that its energies and resources are devoted to protecting the country, stopping problems, including terrorism. And this is a very detailed example that sort of bolsters that case that the NSA has been making throughout this period after the Snowden leaks began.
Okay, Greg Miller, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.